Hi everyone, this is Miss Hillman here, and I'm going to go through some of your science homework for you. So the first thing you need to do for your science is you need to read the science mini book. So in your science, if I go back to it, and you go to classwork, due today you have a food chains book quiz. So I am going to look at this. It says first read the mini book, and that's what we're going to do. Then you will take the practice quiz. The practice quiz, I believe, is right here. And then after your practice quiz, you are going to take the Google Forms quiz, and then you are going to mark it as done. So let's go through and read this mini book about food chains. All right, food chains and food webs. Introduction. Anna sits down at the table for a breakfast of oatmeal, yogurt, and orange juice before going to school. The food she takes in will provide energy for learning, gym, and her other morning activities. Where did her energy in food come from? This book explains how living things get the energy and matter they need to survive. You will learn how one living thing depends on another, and that all living things depend on energy from the sun. That sounds like an important fact. All living things depend on energy from the sun. You will also learn what happens when a food source is taken away. Producers and consumers. Living things are either producers or consumers. Producers produce, and produce means make their own food. Green plants are the main producers, so green plants make their own foods. They produce food by using energy from the sun to combine water with a gas from the air. This process is called photosynthesis. Without the sun's energy and the producers that use it for photosynthesis, most living things on Earth would not survive. Consumers cannot make their own food. Instead, they depend on producers for food. For example, grass is a producer. So the grass down here, they make their energy from the sun. And then when a cow eats the grass, the cow is a consumer. So when you consume something, it means that you eat it. Consumers eat or consume. Producers or other consumers. The cow that munched on the grass was growing and also making milk. When you drink a glass of milk or eat a hamburger, you are a consumer too. Producers and consumers depend on each other in many ways. Let's learn about their relationships. Food chains. Food chains show how one living thing depends on another living thing for food and how energy and matter move from producers to consumers. So, for example, from producers like grass to a consumer like a mouse. Since producers make food, they are the first link in a food chain. So producers will always come first. A food chain has only one link for producers, but many links for consumers. Primary consumers are living things that eat plants. They are the next link in a food chain. Grasshoppers and elephants are both primary consumers, or herbivores. They eat producers, plants. And down here you have a picture of a producer. Your producer is your grass, and your primary consumer is this mouse. The mouse is a primary consumer because this little guy down here, he only eats plants. He doesn't eat any meat, just plants. Herbivores often have special body parts that help them get and use the energy stored in certain plant parts. For example, Parrots have tough beaks that can crack open the hard outer cases of tropical fruits and nuts. Elephants have special teeth to grind bark. Even with special body parts, many herbivores must spend a long time eating to obtain enough energy to stay alive. And then down here we have some of our consumers and herbivores that only eat producers like grass. To review, the first link in a food chain is the producers, or plants. The second link is the primary consumers, or herbivores. The third link is secondary consumers, animals that eat the herbivores. These animals are carnivores, or meat eaters. When people think of carnivores, they often think of animals such as tigers and wolves. But other animals, such as insect-eating spiders, anteaters, and some bats, are also carnivores. So are penguins, bald eagles, and other fish eaters. Can you guess what's next in the food chain? After primary consumers, which eat plants, and secondary consumers, which eat herbivores, many food chains have tertiary consumers, carnivores that eat other carnivores. For example, let's say a mouse, which is also a primary consumer, or an herbivore, eats grass, and a snake, a secondary consumer, or a carnivore, eats the mouse. A hawk is something that eats the snake and is a tertiary consumer. Some animals are omnivores, consumers of both plants and animals. That means omnivores eat both plants and animals. Omnivores can eat almost anything. Bears, raccoons, and humans are all omnivores. They may occupy many levels of a food chain. When you eat an apple, you are a primary consumer. When you eat a hamburger, you are a secondary consumer. Do you eat any carnivores? If so, you're also a tertiary consumer. Okay, so here's our picture down here. We have our mouse, and all of the energy comes from the sun. So all of the energy in the chain, it starts with the sun. The grass uses the sun to make its energy, and the mouse gets its energy from the grass. This snake gets its energy from the mouse, and then this bird, the hawk, gets its energy from the snake. But it all really starts with the sun. Predators and prey. Let's learn a little more about the consumers in a food chain. Animals that hunt and eat other animals are predators. The animals they eat are their prey. Take a look at the diagram on page 9. Can you find the animal that is both a predator and a prey? That is both the hunter and hunted. At the top of a food chain are animals that are not food for any other animals. These animals are top predators. In the natural world, top predators have no enemies. Lions, orcas, alligators, and polar bears are all top predators. People are the only animals that pose a serious threat to their survival. As a result, humans are the highest top predator. Producers, predators, and prey, along with air, water, and other parts of an area, together make up an ecosystem. An ecosystem is a collection of living and non-living things and the ways in which they affect each other. In an ecosystem, groups of predators and prey affect each other's numbers. For example, let's look at rabbits and foxes in this diagram. When foxes eat lots of rabbits, the rabbit population drops. As there are fewer rabbits to eat, the fox population drops. Then the rabbit population climbs. Now the foxes have more food, so their numbers start to climb too. The two species keep affecting each other's numbers. Decomposers, the last link in the food chain, are the nature's recyclers. Bacteria and fungi are two types of decomposers. They break down dead plant material, such as branches and autumn leaves. Decomposers also break down the waste and dead bodies of animals. In this way, decomposers get the energy and matter they need to live. They also make matter available for other organisms to use. Decomposers return nutrients to the soil, making the nutrients available to producers, plants. This matter moves through the food chain again, forming a cycle. Without decomposers, Earth would be covered with trash and waste. The cycle of matter would become a one-way street. Food webs. A food chain is a simple way to learn about how energy and matter move through an ecosystem. But in nature, the patterns of eating are rarely as simple as those shown in a food chain. Most animals eat a variety of foods to meet their food and energy needs. In turn, prey animals are usually hunted and eaten by a variety of predators. When we show all these eating patterns in a diagram, we end up with a complex web of relationships between living things, which is called a food web. All right, down here is an example of a food web in a forest and what kinds of things eat other things. Let's look closely at a few parts of a food web in an ocean ecosystem. The first diagram shows one predator that eats many types of prey as well as a few plants. The second diagram shows several predators that eat the same prey. So up here, this is let's see, our first one. This guy, this sea turtle, this eats lots of types of food. He eats all of these things. And down here, this little crab, many types of animals eat this little crab. Now imagine combining the diagrams on page 14, so combining the diagrams, putting them together, showing the diets of other ocean species ranging in size from tiny plants and animals to whales. The result is a food web, which is much more complex than a food chain. So this is a food web down here. There's a lot more lines and a lot more arrows. And your food chain would look more like this. The diagram on this page gives you a basic idea of an ocean food web, but the page is not large enough to include all the details. Energy pyramid. An energy pyramid shows how energy is used by living things and transferred to the environment as it passes from one part of a food chain or food web to the next part. When an herbivore, a primary consumer, eats plants, only a fraction of the energy from the plants is used by the animal to grow. The rest of the energy is used for movement, digestion, and reproduction, or is lost to the environment. Only some of it is passed on when the herbivore is eaten by a carnivore. The carnivore, a secondary consumer, takes in that small amount of energy when it eats the herbivore. Most of that energy will be lost as waste or used up by the carnivore. Only a fraction or a part of the energy from the herbivore it ate will become part of the carnivore's body. Now imagine that another carnivore, a tertiary consumer, eats the first carnivore. Can you see how little energy is available to this animal? Okay, so when you have herbivores, these are animals that only eat plants. They eat the plant and they only get to keep a little bit of the energy that stays with them. And then as another animal eats that animal, only a little bit less energy gets to stay with them. And then when another animal eats that animal, even less energy stays with them. Because a small amount of energy is passed along at each level, an ecosystem needs many more producers. It needs lots of plants than consumers, animals. Primary consumers, then secondary consumers, and secondary consumers, then tertiary consumers. So it needs a lot of this stuff. It needs the most of this stuff. It needs grass and plants, and then a little less of the primary consumers, a little less of the secondary consumers, and it should have the least amount of tertiary consumers. Survival. Take another look at the second diagram on page 14. Yep, these are our oceans. All those animals are in competition with each other for the same crabs. How does nature help all of them survive? Each species has adaptations, special body parts or behaviors that help its members find what they need to survive. They must often fight for food. For example, the sea turtle has a hard beak that helps it break open a crab. It also has a hard shell to protect its body if it fights with another animal for the crab. All of the crab's predators have different adaptations that protect them as they compete for the food they need. Changes in an ecosystem can make it harder for a living thing to survive. Changes can also affect all other living things in its food web. Imagine that a disease kills a type of grass, a producer, on an African savanna. Antelopes and other herbivores, primary consumers, that need the grass for energy will suffer. Some herbivores will start eating other plants. Other herbivores will move to a different area or die. What will happen to the secondary consumers that need those herbivores for energy? So what will happen to the animals that eat things like antelopes? There's no grass for the antelopes to eat, so the antelopes are going to die. And if the antelopes are going to die, what happens to the animals that need to eat the antelopes? This type of chain reaction can cause a whole group of living things or a whole species to become extinct. It shows the importance of protecting every link in every food chain in an ecosystem. All the links are connected, and any disturbance echoes through the whole ecosystem. Changes to an ecosystem can have many causes. Diseases, natural disasters, and human-caused threats such as oil spills, pesticides, and other things can harm food chains and food webs. Scientists are now concerned about the impact of global warming on food webs. Even small increases in ocean temperature are affecting the tiny organisms that are the foundation of ocean food webs. Another serious threat to food webs is caused by people introducing a new producer or consumer into an ecosystem. Sometimes people introduce a new species on purpose, such as bringing cattle to raise for food. Sometimes non-native species arrive by accident, such as rats that came to North America on boats from Europe. Not all introduced species cause harm, but those that do are called invasive species because they invade into an ecosystem. An invasive species can do terrible damage to an ecosystem. In the 1700s, foxes were introduced to Alaska's Aleutian Islands to increase the fur trade. Native seabirds, which weren't used to the predators, became easy prey for the foxes. With far fewer seabirds, the island's lush vegetation disappeared. Vegetation is like grass and plants. The vegetation could only survive with the help of the nutrients in bird droppings. So it could only survive with the nutrients that are found in bird poop. Conclusion. In this book, you've learned about producers, which use the sun's energy to make their own food. So all of the producers get their energy from the sun, and then other animals get their energy from the producers. You've also learned about consumers and decomposers. Each of these links in a food chain has an important role in the movement of matter and energy in an ecosystem. A change in one link can affect a whole ecosystem. Remember Anna from page 4? She was a primary consumer when she ate oatmeal and drank orange juice. When she ate yogurt, a product of an herbivore, she became a secondary consumer. And if you're wondering if she's ever a tertiary consumer, the answer to that is yes. Her dad is making crab wraps for dinner. Anna gains energy and matter from the food she eats. She uses them to grow and live. Anna is part of a complex food web where energy flows and matter cycles. All right, that is our mini book all about food chains and food webs.